On my 30th birthday, my mother-in-law raised a toast and said, "To our little fool from a poor family who lives off our money." My husband burst into loud laughter. At that moment, my father rose from the table and did something that made my mother-in-law freeze in her tracks. Turning 30 is a milestone that people usually celebrate on a grand scale. I didn't want a noisy party, but Rodrigo insisted. "Esperanza, come on, this is an important date," he told me, gazing at me with those brown eyes that shimmered with golden sparks, the very sparks that once made me fall madly in love with him. Looking back now, I realized those sparks weren't signs of warmth in his soul, but only a trick of the light, deceptive, like so much else in our family life. The morning of my birthday began with chaos. Rodrigo had booked a banquet hall at El Palacio, the most expensive and pretentious restaurant in town. I knew this choice was not really for me, but for his mother, Beatriz, a woman who, in the 8 years of our marriage, had never once called me by my name, preferring instead a faceless her, or at best, our daughter-in-law. "You can't imagine how hard it was to reserve this place," Rodrigo boasted as we drove to the restaurant to discuss the menu. "People line up 6 months in advance, but I pulled some strings, and voila." I knew very well which strings he had pulled. The owner of the restaurant was an old acquaintance of his father, Eduardo, a powerful businessman who controlled half of the region's construction industry. A man whose name was spoken with awe by anyone even remotely connected to real estate and investments. Unlike his wife, my father-in-law had always treated me neutrally, not warmly, but without open hostility either. He was too absorbed in his business to pay attention to what he called women's squabbles. To him, marrying off his son was simply another box to tick in the list of life's necessities. Continuing the family line, maintaining the image of a proper family man, that's what mattered. And who exactly became the wife was secondary, as long as she didn't get in the way and knew her place. My place in the Herrera family had been made clear from day one: the silent companion, the grateful girl from humble origins, lucky beyond measure to be admitted into high society. My own family was ordinary, working class. My father was an engineer at a textile factory, my mother an elementary school teacher. We never lived lavishly, but we never struggled either. My parents gave me what mattered most: an education, and the understanding that a person's worth isn't measured by the thickness of their wallet. My father, Fernando, disliked the Herrera family from the very first meeting. "Esperanza, they look at people like they're merchandise," he told me as we drove home after meeting Rodrigo's parents for the first time. "For them, everything has a price, even love." I brushed it off back then. Youth, infatuation, the desire to believe in the best, it all blinded me to the obvious red flags. Besides, Rodrigo himself seemed different from his parents, more open, sincere, modern. We met at university. I was studying journalism, and he was in economics. We first crossed paths at an interfaculty conference. I was there as a student newspaper reporter, and he was presenting on new economic trends. I remember how he stood confidently on stage, juggling complicated terms and statistics, while I looked up at him, in both the literal and figurative sense, thinking I'd never met such a brilliant and handsome guy. After the conference, he came up to me himself. "You were listening so attentively," he said with a smile. "I wrote down everything, even more than I needed to," I admitted, showing him my notebook, filled margin to margin. Rodrigo invited me to a cafe. Then again. And again. Our romance moved quickly. Just 6 months later, he introduced me to his parents. 3 months after that, he proposed. 2 months later, we were married. The wedding deserves its own story. Beatriz took control of the entire event, turning it into a showcase of the Herrera family status. 400 guests, most of whom I had never met. A 5-star hotel banquet hall, decorated with live orchids flown in from Thailand. My dress, chosen by my mother-in-law without asking my opinion, was from a famous designer. "It costs as much as an apartment in the capital," she whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "but what won't a mother do for her son's happiness?" My parents were barely visible at this grand display. They had been seated at a table somewhere in the back, next to distant Herrera relatives who were invited only for numbers. My father sat with a stony face, glancing at me now and then with worry in his eyes. My mother tried to look like everything was fine, but I could see her nervously twisting the edge of the tablecloth. The most painful moment came when it was time for the parents' toasts. Eduardo spoke at length, addressing mostly his business partners seated at the place of honor. He talked about his successful son, about the importance of building the right kind of family, about continuing the Herrera dynasty. As for me, just a couple of perfunctory phrases. When it was my father's turn, Beatriz tried to interfere. Perhaps we should move straight to the dancing? We're running short on time, she announced loudly to the host. But my father was already on his feet. He was no orator, just simple, heartfelt words about love, about how his daughter's happiness meant more to him than anything else in the world. Rodrigo, he said in closing, looking directly at my brand new husband, remember that you have received the most precious thing I have. Take care of her. At that moment I saw Beatrice lean toward her friend and whisper something behind her hand. The friend quietly giggled in response. The first years of marriage passed in a blur. Rodrigo joined his father's company, naturally, in a managerial position right from the start. We had an apartment, a wedding gift from his parents, spacious, in an elite building, with furniture and appliances chosen, once again, by Beatrice. My journalism career stalled almost immediately. At first, Rodrigo hinted that the wife of a Herrera heir shouldn't be running around town with a tape recorder. Then he openly demanded that I quit. Why do you need that job? It doesn't bring in any real money, and it wastes time you could be devoting to the family. By family he meant, first and foremost, formal dinners, charity galas, and other social events where Rodrigo Herrera's wife was expected to make an appearance in proper style. Over 8 years, I learned how to smile on cue, make small talk about nothing, and gracefully deflect indiscreet questions about why we still had no children. And indeed, there were no children, not because we didn't want them, but because it simply wasn't happening. I went through countless medical tests, took hormone treatments, consulted the best specialists. Rodrigo was tested only once, and that after much persuasion. The problem clearly isn't me, he declared when his results came back normal. Keep up with your treatment. Beatrice used the subject of childlessness as yet another way to jab at me. Must run in her family, she would say to her friends at tea, not bothering to lower her voice though I was sitting right there. Her mother only had one child too, unlike me, 3, and all perfectly healthy. Rodrigo couldn't care less about such comments. Mother just worries we don't have kids, he would brush it off whenever I tried to bring it up with him. In time, I learned to tune out my mother-in-law's barbs, developing a coping mechanism, detaching inside, imagining myself far away, by the sea, in the mountains, in a forest. Anywhere but here, in this gilded cage where my personality was being systematically squeezed out of me. Perhaps it would have gone on like that indefinitely, if not for one event that turned my whole life upside down. 6 months before that ill-fated birthday, I accidentally came across the family's financial records. Rodrigo had left his laptop open, and on the screen was a spreadsheet of monthly income and expenses. I hadn't meant to snoop, I only wanted to close the lid so the battery wouldn't die, but my eyes caught on the numbers, and I froze. It turned out that my husband, who supposedly held a managerial position in his father's company, actually received only a token salary there. The real money was simply being transferred to him every month from Eduardo's personal account. In truth, 32-year-old Rodrigo was living off an allowance from his father. The discovery shook me to the core. For years he had presented himself as a successful businessman working for the family empire, boasting of deals he had supposedly closed, projects he had allegedly carried out, when in fact, he was nothing more than a dependent, play-acting at being a man of business. I didn't confront him right away. I decided to watch, to gather more information. And the more I uncovered, the clearer it became that the entire Herrera world was built on lies and pretense. Their elite status, their social standing, their business connections, all of it rested solely on Eduardo's money and influence. Rodrigo had achieved nothing on his own. Worse still, he was deeply in debt to his father. Another spreadsheet showed the large sums he borrowed for his whims. And the final blow, I realized that even our apartment, which I'd been reminded of countless times as a generous gift from Rodrigo's parents, wasn't truly a gift at all but rather an investment. The apartment was formally registered in my name, but Eduardo had made a signed document stipulating that in the event of divorce, I would have to repay the full cost of the property. It's just a formality, father is being cautious, don't think about it, Rodrigo had waved it off at the time. These discoveries completely changed the way I saw my husband's family. I saw them for what they were, pretentious, deceitful, living for appearances, obsessed with status and public opinion. And I began to see Rodrigo differently too. How could I have failed to notice his immaturity? How had I not seen that behind the mask of a successful man was just a spoiled boy, used to getting everything with the snap of his fingers? The answer was both simple and painful. I hadn't wanted to see the truth. I had preferred to believe in the fairy tale I had painted for myself, the fairy tale of a handsome prince, sincere love, and a happy family. During that time, I called my parents more often than usual. I didn't tell them about my discoveries. I didn't want to worry them, especially my father, who had recently been diagnosed with heart problems. But somehow, with a sixth sense, he understood that things weren't right in my life. "Esperanza, you can always come back home," he said during one of our phone calls, so simply and so sincerely that I nearly burst into tears. "I know, Papa," I replied, trying to keep my voice cheerful. "Remember, real wealth isn't money, it's the people who truly love you." I often recalled those words in the months that followed, as I watched the Herrera family almost as if from the outside, seeing all their flaws, their fake smiles, their staged emotions. I didn't know what to do. Divorce, trying to mend the relationship, an honest conversation with Rodrigo, every option seemed both possible and impossible at the same time. And then came my 30th birthday, a milestone I would have preferred to celebrate quietly, with my closest loved ones. But as already mentioned, Rodrigo insisted on a lavish party, or rather, it was his mother who insisted. 30 is an important age, Beatriz declared peremptorily. It must be celebrated in style. And style, in her understanding, meant the same pretentious restaurant, El Palacio, 80 guests, most of them Herrera's friends and colleagues, people I barely knew, and a menu whose cost could probably feed a small African village for a year. I decided not to argue. After all, it was just one evening. Besides, I had invited my parents and a few old friends. The presence of people close to me would at least make the evening more bearable. My parents arrived the day before the celebration. My father looked tired, his heart condition and the long trip were taking their toll. My mother fussed over him, offering pills, water, urging him to lie down and rest. "I'm fine," he waved her off. "Don't treat me like an invalid." We sat in the kitchen of our luxurious apartment, drinking tea and talking about everything under the sun. I caught myself thinking that, for the first time in a long while, I felt truly at peace, truly at home. "How's work, Papa?" I asked, knowing that recently there had been layoffs at the factory. "Fine," he answered, but his voice lacked conviction. "We're managing." My mother gave him a quick glance I couldn't decipher. "Papa, what's going on?" I asked directly. He sighed. "The factory is shutting down. Next month will be the last shift, and that's it. Why didn't you tell me earlier?" "I didn't want to worry you. You have enough on your plate. Will you manage financially?" "Don't worry about us," my mother put her hand over mine. "We have savings. Besides, your father has already found another job, though with a lower salary. But we won't go under." I felt a sharp pang of guilt. All these years I had lived in luxury, never sparing a thought for how my parents lived, accepting expensive gifts from the Herreras, traveling to resorts, wearing designer clothes. While my father and mother had been saving, pinching pennies from every paycheck, worrying about the future. "I can help," I said firmly. "Don't even think about it," my father cut me off. "We won't take money from you." "But why not? It's normal to help your parents." "It's normal to help with your own money, not your husband's," my father said firmly. I wanted to argue, to say that I had my own savings, though in truth, not much, but at that moment the phone rang. It was Rodrigo, asking whether I had remembered the dress fitting for tomorrow's celebration. Of course I remembered, I lied. In fact, I had completely forgotten about the dress, chosen, of course, by Beatriz. Another designer masterpiece, meant to demonstrate the wealth of the Herrera family. I had to rush to get ready and head to the salon. My parents stayed in the apartment. My father needed rest before the next day. At the salon, my mother-in-law was waiting. She critically examined the dress hanging on a special rack, deep blue, with a plunging back and a scattering of crystals along the hem. Finally, she snorted when she saw me. "I thought you weren't coming." "Sorry, I was talking with my parents." "Oh, so they've arrived." She curled her lips as if she had tasted something sour. "I hope they've prepared for tomorrow's event, bought appropriate clothes." I felt anger boiling inside. "My parents always look appropriate for the occasion," I answered, trying to keep my voice calm. Well, Beatriz smirked. "I remember at your wedding, your father wore a suit that went out of style 20 years ago." I stayed silent. There was no point in arguing with her. Besides, we were in a salon full of other clients and consultants. The fitting took place in a strained atmosphere. My mother-in-law commented on every detail, every fold of the dress. "The waist needs to be taken in," she commanded the seamstress, "and shorten the sleeves. And for God's sake, do something about this paleness," this last part directed at me. "Book an urgent tanning session." When we left the salon, Beatriz suddenly took me by the arm, a gesture that to outsiders might have seemed friendly, but in reality was just her way of controlling my movements. Listen, Esperanza, she began in the tone she reserved for particularly unpleasant conversations. Tomorrow is a very important day. All our friends will be there, Eduardo's colleagues, business partners. I'm asking you to control your parents. What do you mean? I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. Literally that. At the wedding, your father made certain remarks that put us in an awkward position. I don't want a repeat of that. My father is a man of dignity, and he has never made inappropriate remarks. I felt the blood rush to my face. Oh, please, Beatrice waved her hand dismissively. All that talk about real values and true feelings. Everyone knows their own price, dear. And the price of your family, let's be honest, isn't very high. At that moment something inside me snapped. Everything I had swallowed in 8 years of marriage, all the slights, the humiliations, the times I bit my tongue for the sake of peace, rose from deep within and turned into a cold, controlled fury. You know what, Beatrice, I said quietly but firmly, you're right. Everyone knows their price. And your family, with all its money and connections, isn't worth even a tenth of what mine is. She froze, her mouth open. In 8 years, I had never once dared to speak to her that way. What did you just say? She finally managed. You heard me perfectly well. And tomorrow, at the celebration, I'll be at my parents' side. And if anyone, I emphasized the word, staring straight into her eyes, dares show them disrespect, I will not stay silent. Don't doubt it for a second. Without waiting for her reply, I turned and walked to my car. My hands were trembling, my heart was pounding wildly, but inside I felt astonishingly calm. For the first time in a long while, I felt real, not a doll, not a decoration in the Herrera family's performance, but a living person with dignity of her own. That evening, when Rodrigo came home, I realized Beatrice had already complained to him. He stormed into the apartment, slamming the door behind him. What do you think you're doing? He barked instead of a greeting. I was sitting in the kitchen with my parents. We were drinking tea and talking about the upcoming party. Hello, Rodrigo, I replied calmly. What exactly is bothering you? You were rude to my mother. She called me in tears. I wasn't rude. I only asked her to treat my parents with respect. Rodrigo's gaze shifted to my father and mother, as if only then noticing their presence. Good evening, Fernando, Carmen, he muttered through clenched teeth. Hello, Rodrigo, my father replied. Why don't you sit down? Let's talk this over calmly. There's nothing to discuss. Esperanza, a word in private. He nodded toward the living room. I followed him. As soon as we left the kitchen, he grabbed me by the arm. Are you out of your mind? He hissed. Tomorrow is an important day. All our acquaintances will be there, and you're picking fights with my mother. I didn't start a fight. Your mother once again insulted my family, and I simply let her know I won't tolerate it anymore. What do you mean insulted? She only wanted tomorrow to go perfectly. Perfectly for whom, Rodrigo? For your mother? For your father? What about me? It's my birthday, yet somehow all the decisions are made without me. He let go of my arm and ran his hand through his hair, a gesture he always made when he was nervous. Esperanza, let's not quarrel. Tomorrow is an important day. We need to keep up appearances. A face, or a mask, slipped out of my mouth. What do you mean? And suddenly I realized I was exhausted, tired of pretending, of playing a role, of being someone I was not. Nothing, I sighed. Let's just get through tomorrow. Rodrigo stared at me intently, as if trying to figure out what was happening to me, but, as usual, he didn't dig any deeper. Well then, perfect, he said with relief. And please, tomorrow, keep your emotions under control. He kissed me on the cheek, a dry, formal kiss, and went off to take a shower. I returned to the kitchen, where my parents were waiting. Is everything all right? My mother asked anxiously. Yes, everything's fine, I smiled, trying to look carefree. My father watched me with his sharp, perceptive gaze. Esperanza, you know you can tell us if something's wrong. I know, Papa. It's just a small misunderstanding. That happens in every family. He nodded, but I could see he didn't believe me. My father had always sensed when I wasn't telling the truth. The rest of the evening was spent preparing for the next day. I helped my mother iron her dress for the celebration. We spent a long time choosing which jewelry she should wear. My father sat watching the news on television, occasionally commenting on particularly striking stories. Rodrigo kept himself distant. He had dinner with us, exchanged a few perfunctory remarks with my parents, and then disappeared into his study, citing urgent work. That night I lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how much my life had changed in 8 years, how much I had changed. From a confident, ambitious girl, I had become a shadow, an appendage to the Herrera name. Rodrigo slept beside me, breathing softly. In sleep, his face looked younger, more vulnerable. Sometimes in such moments I remembered why I had fallen in love with him, his enthusiasm, his ability to dream, his gift for seeing the world in bright colors. Where had all that gone? When had the man I loved turned into a copy of his father, a cold, calculating businessman? The morning of my birthday began in a rush. A hairdresser, a makeup artist, a manicurist, all summoned to our apartment at Beatrice's order. My mother, seeing this parade of professionals, only shook her head. Esperanza, you are beautiful without all of this, she told me when we had a moment alone. Thank you, Mama. But you know, with the Herreras, everything must be perfect. Yes, I know, she sighed. Just don't forget that you're not only a Herrera, but also a Mendoza. Mendoza, my mother's maiden name, which I had almost forgotten over the years. Beatrice always wrinkled her nose when she heard it. So plain, she would say. Good thing you're a Herrera now. By 4 o'clock I was fully ready. My hair was styled into an elaborate updo, my makeup flawless, the new dress fitting like a glove. I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back, beautiful, polished, with perfect makeup and empty eyes. Where had that lively, genuine girl gone? My parents were ready too. My mother, in a modest but elegant dark green dress. My father, in a new suit they had bought especially for the occasion. You look wonderful, Papa, I said, straightening his tie. Thank you, daughter, he smiled. I decided I should match the level of the event. In his eyes I saw a mix of pride and worry, pride in me, and worry that my glittering social position might not be as happy as it appeared. Rodrigo had called for 2 cars, one for us, one for my parents. It'll be more convenient, he explained. But I knew the real reason. He simply didn't want to ride in the same car with my ordinary parents. The El Palacio restaurant sparkled with lights. At the entrance, waiters greeted guests with trays of champagne. People were already arriving, mostly Herrera's colleagues and friends. I saw my parents pause awkwardly at the entrance, unsure where to go. Mama, Papa, I said, taking a glass of champagne from a tray. Come, I'll show you your seats. I had made sure their table was placed next to ours, so they wouldn't feel pushed to the sidelines as they had at the wedding. Beatrice noticed, pressed her lips together, but said nothing. The guests streamed in, one after another. I stood at the entrance with Rodrigo, accepting congratulations and gifts. Most of the guests I barely knew, my father-in-law's business partners, my mother-in-law's friends, distant relatives. But there were also my friends, several classmates I kept in touch with, and 2 colleagues from the magazine where I once worked. When everyone had gathered, the banquet began. The host, a well-known entertainer in the city, announced the opening of the celebration. There were congratulations, toasts, musical numbers. Everything was organized with the typical Herrera grandeur. I sat at the central table between Rodrigo and his father. Eduardo, as usual, was laconic, occasionally nodding to the music, politely applauding performers, but spending most of the evening scrolling through something on his phone. Beatrice, on the other hand, was in her element, moving from table to table, chatting with guests, laughing loudly at the host's jokes, occasionally leaning over to whisper something in Rodrigo's ear. After the 3rd toast, I noticed that my father looked pale. Papa, are you all right? I asked, coming over to their table. Yes, don't worry, he gave me a weak smile. It's just a bit stuffy in here. Maybe step out to the terrace, get some fresh air? Good idea. I'll go for a few minutes. I watched him leave, anxiety building inside me. His health had worsened lately, though he tried not to show it. Rodrigo, noticing my worry, came over. What's wrong? Papa's not feeling well. He went out for some air. It's nothing, Rodrigo waved it off casually. He'll breathe some fresh air and feel better. Come on, it's time for your dance. I returned to the table, though my thoughts stayed with my father. At that moment, the host announced it was time for the special dance of the birthday girl with her husband. Rodrigo led me to the center of the hall. Slow music began to play, and we spun around the floor. Smile, Rodrigo whispered, holding me by the waist. Everyone's watching us. I obediently stretched my lips into a smile, all the while thinking how false my life had become. Even in such an intimate moment as a dance with my husband, what mattered wasn't our feelings, it was the impression we made on others. After the dance, a parade of congratulations began. One after another, guests stepped up to the microphone, offered warm words, presented gifts. Most of the speeches sounded perfunctory, insincere. They praised my beauty, my fortunate marriage, how lucky I was to have become part of the Herrera family. Finally, it was Rodrigo's parents' turn. Eduardo stood, took the microphone, and delivered a short but flowery speech. "Esperanza," he said at the end, "you are a worthy wife for our son. I wish you health, beauty, and, at last, that you bless us with grandchildren." I smiled politely, already used to such hints. Beatriz looked expectantly at her husband, clearly waiting for him to hand her the microphone. But when Eduardo finished, he simply returned to his seat. That was clearly not part of her plan. She rose on her own, strode determinedly to the center of the hall, and took the microphone from the host. "Dear friends," she began, sweeping the hall with her gaze, "today is a celebration. The 30th birthday of our daughter-in-law, Esperanza. A beautiful date, a beautiful girl." The hall buzzed approvingly. Someone shouted, "Kiss." Beatriz smiled, that smile of hers that never reached her eyes. "Yes, yes, there will be kisses. But first, I want to say a few words." I felt a knot tighten inside me. Something in her tone, in her expression, told me that something unpleasant was about to happen. Esperanza came into our family 8 years ago. A simple girl from an ordinary family. Who would have thought back then that she would fit into our circle so conveniently? A ripple of laughter ran through the room. I saw my mother stiffen at the next table. In these years, she has learned much. She has become a true Herrera, elegant, presentable. True, there are still no children, but let's hope that is only temporary. Another chuckle. Heat flooded my face. And today, I want to raise a toast to our Esperanza, to our little fool from a poor family who lives on our money. Silence fell over the hall. I stared at Beatriz, unable to believe my ears. Next to me, Rodrigo suddenly burst into loud laughter, which sounded especially cruel in the hush. And then something happened that no one expected. My father, who had just returned from the terrace, slowly rose from his seat. Pale but resolute, he walked toward the center of the hall, where Beatriz stood with her glass raised. Papa, I wanted to stop him, but he was already moving, back straight, with an expression on his face I had never seen before. The hall went silent. All eyes turned to my father, a simple factory engineer, making his way toward the microphone in the luxurious restaurant. Beatriz stood frozen with her smile, clearly not understanding what was happening. When my father reached her, she involuntarily stepped back. "Excuse me," he said calmly, though there was steel in his voice. "May I have the microphone?" Beatriz, caught off guard, handed it to him without a word. My father took it and turned to the hall. His face was pale but steady. I noticed my mother half rise from her seat, worried about his health. "Good evening, esteemed guests," my father began. "My name is Fernando. I am Esperanza's father, the one you are congratulating tonight." I held my breath. What would he say? Would he cause a scandal? I knew my father as a calm, restrained man. But after such an insult, he had every right to anger. "I would like to say a few words about my daughter," he continued, "about the Esperanza I know, not the one Beatriz just described." The room was silent. Rodrigo beside me tensed, clearly ready to intervene if my father went too far. Eduardo finally put down his phone and watched with interest. "My daughter is not a fool," my father's voice rang firm. "She graduated from university with honors, worked at a prestigious magazine, had prospects for a successful career. But she chose family. Your family, the Herreras." Beatriz turned pale. She clearly had not expected this turn. As for poverty, my father gave a faint smile. "That is all relative. Of course, my wife and I never had as much money as the Herrera family. We are simple working people. I am an engineer, my wife a teacher. We do not drive luxury cars, we do not vacation at elite resorts. But we were never poor." He paused, sweeping the room with his gaze. "We gave our daughter the most important things, an education, and the understanding that human dignity is not measured by the thickness of one's wallet. We taught her honesty, hard work, and respect for people regardless of social status. And I am proud of the person my Esperanza has become." Tears welled in my eyes. Rodrigo looked at me with an expression I couldn't read, something between surprise and confusion. "And one last thing," my father turned to Beatriz, "about money. My daughter has never lived on yours, Beatriz. She lived with your son, built a home for him, supported him in everything. That is called family, not dependence." My mother-in-law stood as if turned to stone. Her face showed such shock, it was as though she had been struck. "And now," my father extended the microphone back to the host, "I would like to return to celebrating my daughter's birthday. Esperanza, happy anniversary. Your mother and I love you very much." He turned to leave but suddenly stopped, swayed, and clutched his chest. A sharp pain spread across his face. Papa! I rushed to him, watching the color drain from his skin. He tried to say something, but no words came out. His knees buckled, and he began to collapse to the floor. Call an ambulance! I shouted, holding my father up. He has a heart condition. The hall erupted in chaos. Someone ran for a phone, others tried to help. My mother rushed over, her face contorted with horror. Fernando, hold on, she whispered, stroking his face. The ambulance is on its way. My father lay on the floor, his breathing heavy and uneven. I held his hand, feeling it grow cold. Esperanza, he whispered with difficulty, I'm sorry I ruined your party. Don't be ridiculous, Papa, I squeezed his hand. You ruined nothing. You're the best father in the world. Rodrigo stood nearby, pale and bewildered. The ambulance is coming, he said. Hold on, Fernando. Beatriz had stepped aside, clearly unsure how to react. Eduardo approached us and knelt down beside my father. I know an excellent cardiologist, he said. I'll call him now so he can meet the ambulance at the hospital. I looked at my father-in-law in surprise. This gesture seemed so uncharacteristic of him that I didn't know how to respond. The ambulance arrived 10 minutes later, though it felt like an eternity. The medics quickly assessed my father's condition, hooked up a heart monitor, started in 4. Their faces were grave, their movements swift and precise. Heart attack, one of the doctors said. We need to get him to the hospital immediately. They lifted my father onto a stretcher and carried him toward the exit. I walked beside him, holding his hand. I'm going with him, I told my mother, who followed, quietly sobbing. So am I, she said, wiping her tears. When the ambulance drove away, carrying my parents, I stood frozen at the entrance of the restaurant. The celebration was hopelessly ruined, but that was the last thing on my mind. My father's life hung by a thread, and everything else seemed trivial, insignificant. Rodrigo came up to me. Esperanza, I'm so sorry, he said, trying to embrace me. I didn't know your father's heart problems were so serious. I pulled away. In that moment, I couldn't bear his touch. You laughed, I said quietly. When your mother insulted me and my family, you laughed. He looked embarrassed. I didn't think you'd take it so seriously. My mother was only joking. Joking? I looked at him in disbelief. Calling me a fool from a poor family in front of all the guests, that's a joke? Esperanza, you're exaggerating. Mother can be sharp sometimes, but she didn't mean to hurt you. I shook my head. Don't lie to me now, Rodrigo. Your mother has hated me since the day we met, and you know it. He opened his mouth to protest, but at that moment Eduardo approached. Esperanza, he said, I've sent for my driver. He'll take you to the hospital, and I've arranged for Professor Martinez to oversee your father's care. Thank you, Eduardo. I was genuinely surprised by his concern. But I can take a taxi. Don't argue, he said firmly. My driver is already waiting. Rodrigo, escort your wife. Rodrigo nodded and took me by the arm. We walked toward the exit in silence. At the doors, I saw Beatriz. She stood hugging herself, her face lost and shaken. Esperanza, she began as we passed. I didn't mean. Not now, I cut her off. I need to be with my father. In my father-in-law's car, I sat staring out the window, thinking about how quickly life can change. Just an hour ago I was the birthday girl at a lavish celebration, and now I was on my way to the hospital, not knowing if my father would survive. Rodrigo sat beside me in silence. Perhaps he understood that any words would be meaningless, or perhaps he simply didn't know what to say. At the hospital, we were met by Professor Martinez, a gray-bearded older doctor with a keen, attentive gaze. Are you Fernando's relatives? He asked. I'm his daughter, I answered. Your father is in intensive care. He suffered a massive heart attack. His condition has been stabilized, but it's serious. He will require surgery. Surgery? I felt the ground slip from under my feet. Yes, a bypass. But first he must stabilize completely. For now, the priority is to keep his heart functioning. Can I see him? Only through the glass. Visitors aren't allowed inside intensive care. We walked down the corridor to the ICU. Through the glass window I saw my father lying in bed, surrounded by wires and tubes. My mother sat beside him, holding his hand. She looked 10 years older. Mama, I knocked on the glass. She lifted her head, saw me, and came out into the hallway. How is he? I asked, hugging her. No change yet. She looked exhausted. The doctors say the next 24 hours will be critical. We sat down on a bench in the corridor. Rodrigo stood awkwardly nearby, clearly unsure what to do. Esperanza, he finally said, maybe I should go back home? Someone has to explain to the guests, settle things with the restaurant. I nodded. Yes, go. I'll stay here. Are you sure? I can stay with you. There's no need. Go. He leaned down to kiss me on the cheek, but I turned away. After everything that had happened, his touch only repelled me. Rodrigo left, and my mother and I sat together in the hospital corridor, watching my father through the glass as he fought for his life. What happened at the restaurant? My mother asked after a long silence. I was sitting far away and didn't hear what your mother-in-law said. I only saw your father suddenly stand and walk toward her. I told her about Beatrice's toast, about Rodrigo's laughter, and about how my father had stood up with dignity to defend me. He's always protected you, my mother said with a sad smile, since you were a little girl. Do you remember when kids teased you at school because of your glasses? He went straight to the principal and made such a fuss that no one ever dared to mock you again. I remembered that, and many other moments. My father had always been my protector, my rock, the one who believed in me unconditionally and loved me without limits. He shouldn't have had to get so worked up, I whispered. It was my place to put Beatrice in hers. Don't blame yourself, my mother took my hand. He did what he thought was right, he defended his daughter's honor. We stayed in the hospital all night. The nurses brought us tea, the doctors checked on my father periodically, saying his condition hadn't worsened, but hadn't improved much either. In the morning Eduardo arrived, alone, without Rodrigo or Beatrice. He brought thermoses of hot coffee and fresh rolls. How is Fernando? He asked, handing us the food. No change, my mother replied. Thank you for your concern, Eduardo. He nodded and sat down beside us. I spoke with Professor Martinez. He believes the surgery would be best done in the capital, at the cardiology center. I can arrange transport as soon as Fernando is stable enough to move. I looked at him in surprise. Why are you doing this? Eduardo was silent for a moment, staring into the distance. You know, Esperanza, he said finally, yesterday your father acted like a true man, a man of dignity. I respect people like that, regardless of their financial status. I didn't know what to say. This Eduardo was nothing like the cold, calculating businessman I had known all these years. And besides, he added quietly, I'm ashamed of my wife's and my son's behavior. What happened yesterday was inexcusable. He rose, brushed off his jacket. I'll handle everything with Martinez. Stay strong. Everything will be fine. When my father-in-law left, my mother looked at me in bewilderment. Was he always like that? No, I shook my head. Never. By midday my father's condition had improved slightly. The doctor said that if the progress continued, in 2 days he could be transported to the capital. Rodrigo arrived in the afternoon. He looked tired and subdued. How is your father? He asked, coming up to us. A little better, I replied. Your father suggested transferring him to the capital for surgery. Rodrigo nodded. Yes, he told me. It's a good idea. The best cardiologists are there. We sat in silence. Between us loomed a wall that felt impossible to overcome. Esperanza, he finally said, we need to talk. Not now, Rodrigo. I can't. I understand. But I want you to know, I regret what happened yesterday. And so does my mother. I looked at him with tired irony. Really? Then why didn't either of you come to the hospital yesterday? Why didn't you even call to ask about my father? We didn't want to intrude. We thought you needed to be with your parents. Don't lie, Rodrigo. You were just ashamed. After what your mother did, after you laughed along with her. He lowered his head. Yes, I'm ashamed. But I want to make it right. Some things can't be made right. I turned toward the window. Go home, Rodrigo. I'll stay here. You need rest. You haven't slept all night. I can't leave my father. Then I'll stay too. There's no need. Mama is here, we'll manage. He wanted to argue, but thought better of it. All right, call me if you need anything. When Rodrigo left, my mother placed her hand on my shoulder. Don't be too harsh with him, Esperanza. He's trying to help. Trying now, I said with a bitter laugh. But where was he all these years, when his mother humiliated me and my family? My mother sighed. People can change, daughter. Sometimes it takes a strong shock to see yourself clearly. I said nothing. I didn't want to argue with my mother, especially now, when all our thoughts were about my father. The next 2 days passed within the hospital walls. My father's condition slowly improved, though he remained in intensive care. The doctor said the dynamics were positive, but we had to be ready for surgery. Eduardo came every day, bringing food, speaking with the doctors. Thanks to his connections, my father was given a separate room in the ICU and assigned the best nurses. Rodrigo also came, but never for long. It was as if he sensed that his presence was unwelcome and chose not to impose. Beatrice never appeared at all. She only sent a huge basket of fruit with a note, "Get well, Fernando." On the third day, Professor Martinez told us that my father could be transferred to the capital. "His condition is stable," he said. "Of course, there's a risk, but in the capital he will receive more advanced care." Eduardo organized everything within hours: a medical plane, a team of doctors, and an ambulance to meet us in the capital. "You'll fly with your father," he told me. "Your mother can join later, once Fernando is hospitalized." I was grateful to my father-in-law for his help, though I still didn't understand why he was showing me such attention. "Thank you," I said. "I don't know how we can ever repay you." "No thanks necessary," he waved it off. "Just keep me informed about his condition." On the day of departure, I packed a small bag with only the essentials. My mother had to stay behind for a short while to take care of some things before traveling to the capital, so I flew with my father and the medical team. Rodrigo came to drive me to the airport. We rode in silence. I gazed out the window, thinking about the upcoming surgery, about how much my life had changed in just a few days. At the terminal entrance, Rodrigo suddenly took my hand. "Esperanza," he said seriously, "I want you to know, I'll be waiting for you here, as long as it takes." I looked at him in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I know there's a gulf between us now, and it's my fault, but I want to fix it. Give me a chance." I pulled my hand free. "Now is not the time for this conversation, Rodrigo. My father's life is hanging in the balance." "I know. Just know that I'm here if you need me." I nodded and walked toward the terminal without looking back. Right now, all my thoughts were with my father. The flight went smoothly. The medical plane was fully equipped, and the doctors monitored my father constantly. He was conscious, but weak, barely speaking. In the capital, we were met by an ambulance that rushed him straight to the cardiology center. He was taken immediately for examination while I was asked to wait in a special room for relatives. After an hour, a doctor came out, a tall, middle-aged man with tired but attentive eyes. "Are you Fernando's relative?" he asked. "Yes, I'm his daughter. We've done an initial assessment. His condition is stable, but he requires urgent surgery. He has triple-vessel coronary artery disease. He needs bypass surgery." "When will the operation be?" "Tomorrow morning. Right now he's undergoing preoperative preparation." "May I see him?" "Only for 5 minutes. He needs rest." I entered the intensive care room. My father lay in bed, surrounded by medical equipment. He looked so defenseless, so fragile. I had never seen him like this before. "Papa," I took his hand, "how are you feeling?" He gave me a weak smile. "Fine, daughter. Don't worry. Tomorrow is the operation. Everything will be all right. The doctors here are the best." "I know," he squeezed my hand. "Esperanza, listen to me. If something happens—" "Nothing will happen," I interrupted. "You're going to live a long and happy life." "Esperanza," his voice was quiet but insistent. "Hear me. If something happens, I want you to know, I am proud of you. You grew into a strong, intelligent woman, and I want you to be happy." Tears welled in my eyes. "Papa, don't cry," he smiled faintly. "I just want you to think about your life. About whether you're truly happy with Rodrigo. About what you really want." I didn't know how to answer. Recent events had turned my whole view of my life upside down, my marriage, the Herrera family, everything. "I'll think about it, Papa. I promise." "Good," he closed his eyes. "Now go rest. You need your strength." A nurse came into the room. "Visiting hours are over," she said. "Your father needs rest before surgery." I kissed my father's forehead and left. In the corridor, a hospital social worker was waiting. "A room has been reserved for you at the hospital's guest house," she told me. "It's very close, just 5 minutes walk. You'll be able to rest there." I thanked her and headed in that direction. The guest house was small but comfortable. The room had a bed, a TV, a small fridge stocked with water and juices. Only then did I realize how exhausted I was. 3 days without proper sleep, constant stress and worry, it had all caught up to me. I showered and collapsed into bed. I woke up to the sound of my phone ringing. It was Mama. She had arrived in the capital and was already on her way to the hospital. "How's Papa?" she asked anxiously. "Stable. The operation is scheduled for tomorrow. I'll be there in half an hour." I got up, dressed quickly, and hurried back to the center. Mama was already there, speaking with the doctor. "The surgery is complex," the doctor was saying, "but we have extensive experience with these procedures. The chances are good." Mama nodded, clutching her bag tightly in her hands. When she saw me, she gave me a faint smile. Esperanza, you look better. Did you get some rest? Yes, a little. We were allowed a short visit with father. He was weak but conscious, and he recognized Mama. He even joked about her worried expression. Don't look at me like that, Carmen, he said. I'm not planning to leave for the other side just yet. Mama smiled through her tears. Of course not. You'll still have grandchildren to look after. We spent the entire day at the hospital, leaving only briefly for meals and a little rest at the guest house. In the evening we were told that father was being prepared for surgery, and we were asked to return in the morning. At the hotel, Mama and I lay awake for a long time, though we both knew we needed strength for the next day. Do you think everything will be all right? I asked in the darkness. It has to be, Mama answered firmly. Your father is a strong man. In the morning we came to the hospital early. Father was already being prepared for surgery. We were allowed only a minute with him before they wheeled him into the operating room. Don't worry, he said, trying to smile. I'll be back. Mama kissed him. We'll be waiting. Then he was gone, and we were shown to a waiting room. The surgery was expected to last several hours. Time dragged unbearably slowly. Mama and I sat side by side, speaking hardly at all. Sometimes one of us would step out to buy tea or walk the corridor just to stretch our legs. In the third hour, Eduardo entered the waiting room. I looked at my father-in-law in surprise. I hadn't expected to see him here, in the capital. Eduardo, I stood up to meet him. What are you doing here? I took the morning flight, he replied. I wanted to check on Fernando. He's in surgery. It's been 3 hours. My father-in-law nodded. Professor Martinez said it could take up to 6. That's normal. He sat down with us, produced a thermos of coffee and some sandwiches. You probably haven't had breakfast. Eat. Mama gratefully accepted a sandwich. Thank you, Eduardo. You're very kind. The three of us sat waiting. Eduardo spoke of similar surgeries his acquaintances had undergone, of the high success rates, of how quickly patients recovered after bypass. In a month or two, Fernando will be as good as new, he said confidently. Modern medicine works miracles. His presence was strangely calming. He radiated the quiet assurance of someone accustomed to solving problems and taking responsibility. In the 5th hour, the surgeon appeared, wearing green scrubs and with his mask pulled down around his neck. His face was serious, but not grim. Fernando's relatives? Mama and I jumped to our feet. Yes, that's us. The surgery was successful. We performed triple bypass. The patient is stable and is being transferred to intensive care now. My knees nearly gave out with relief. Beside me, Mama began to weep softly. When can we see him? I asked. Not for at least 6 hours. He needs to wake up from anesthesia. But again, everything went well. The outlook is good. The surgeon left, and we remained standing, unable to believe our luck. Eduardo stepped forward and unexpectedly embraced us both. There, you see, he said with a smile. I told you it would be all right. We left the hospital to take a short walk and eat at a nearby cafe. For the first time in days, I felt I could breathe freely. Father would live. Everything else was secondary. When we returned, we were told that father had regained consciousness, though he was very weak. We were allowed to see him through the glass of the ICU. He lay surrounded by machines, tubes emerging from his chest, for lines, monitors, but his eyes were open. When he saw us, he smiled faintly. He'll recover, Eduardo said. Now I'm certain of it. That evening I called Rodrigo to share the news. Thank God, he exhaled. I was so worried. How are you? I'm fine. Tired, of course, but right now my father is all that matters. Your father is a strong man. He'll pull through. Yes, I know. We fell silent. Strangely, I always found it hard to talk to Rodrigo on the phone. Without eye contact, it felt like we lost our connection. Esperanza, he said at last, Mother wants to speak with you. She truly regrets what happened. I sighed. Rodrigo, now isn't the time for that. I understand. I just promised to pass on the message. All right, I'll call tomorrow with an update on Papa. We said goodbye, and I returned to the guest house room, where Mama was already asleep, worn out from the stress and sleepless nights. The following days passed at the hospital. Father's condition improved steadily. He was moved from ICU to a regular room. The doctors said his recovery was going well, without complications. Eduardo came every day, bringing fruit and juice, speaking with the doctors. He even hired a nurse to ease the burden on Mama and me. On the 5th day after surgery, when Father could already sit up and walk a little in his room, I suddenly spotted a familiar figure in the hospital corridor. Rodrigo. He stood by the window, looking out at the hospital courtyard, not noticing me. I approached him. Rodrigo. He turned, and his face lit up with a smile. Esperanza. I didn't know you were here. Where else would I be? No, I mean right now, in this corridor. I see. When did you get here? This morning. I wanted to know how your father was, and to see you. I nodded. Papa is better. The doctors say he may be discharged in a week. That's wonderful news. May I see him? He's having procedures now. Maybe later. We stood in the corridor, not knowing what else to say. Strange how the man I had lived with for 8 years suddenly felt almost like a stranger. Esperanza, Rodrigo said, looking straight into my eyes, I want to apologize. For everything. For not defending you from my mother. For laughing at her toast. For being so blind. I stayed silent, unsure what to answer. Part of me wanted to forgive him, another part screamed of betrayal. Rodrigo, I said finally, let's not talk about this now. I need time. I understand. Just know, I've changed. What happened with your father made me rethink so much. People often change only when disaster strikes. It's not just words, Esperanza. I truly have changed. And I want to prove it to you. I sighed. We'll see. At that moment a nurse approached. Esperanza, your father is asking for you. I'm coming. I turned to Rodrigo. I have to go. Of course. I'll wait. When I entered the room, my father was sitting up in bed, propped on pillows. He looked better, though still weak. Papa, did you want something? Yes. He patted the bed beside him. Sit. Let's talk. I sat down, taking his hand. How are you feeling? Better, he smiled faintly. The doctors say I'm on the mend. It's true. You'll be discharged soon. Father was quiet for a moment, watching me intently. Esperanza, I want to talk to you about Rodrigo. I looked at him in surprise. You saw him? Yes, he came by while you were at the cafe. He apologized for what happened at your birthday. And what did you tell him? That I accept his apology. But as for your marriage, that's for you to decide. I sighed. I don't know what to do, Papa. Everything feels so tangled. I won't give you advice, daughter. You're a grown, intelligent woman, and you know best what's right for you. Just remember, life is too short to waste on people who don't make you happy. Tears welled in my eyes. I know, Papa. And one more thing, he squeezed my hand. Whatever you decide, your mother and I will always be on your side. I hugged him carefully, not wanting to hurt his healing chest. Thank you, Papa. I love you. I love you too, daughter. Now go. Your husband is waiting. I left the room with a heavy heart. Rodrigo was sitting in the corridor, flipping through a magazine. When he saw me, he stood. How is your father? Good. He told me you visited him. Yes, Rodrigo looked embarrassed. I wanted to apologize. And? Did it work? I think so. Your father is an incredible man. He listened to me without interrupting, and then he said life is too short to hold grudges. I smiled. That was so like Papa, wise, forgiving. Esperanza, Rodrigo took my hand. Let's take a walk. There's something I want to tell you. We left the hospital and walked down a path leading to a small park. I've been rethinking a lot these past days, Rodrigo began. The way I lived, the way I treated you, your parents, how I allowed my mother to say all those horrible things. I stayed silent, not interrupting. You know, I was always Mama's boy, he continued with a bitter smile. I did what she wanted, said what she wanted to hear. I even married you partly because she didn't object. What? I stopped, shocked. No, not like that, he winced. I loved you. Truly, I did. But her approval mattered to me. She saw you as someone who could be shaped into our lifestyle. Shaped, I felt anger rising inside me. Yes, that's the word she used. She'll make a good Herrera, if we raise her properly. I didn't think much of it at the time, but I should have. We walked on in silence, his words sinking in. I struggled to reconcile the Rodrigo I had once loved with the man standing beside me now. Why are you telling me this now? I finally asked. Because I want to be honest. Because I'm tired of living in the shell my mother built for me. Because I still love you, and I don't want to lose you. I looked at him in surprise. In his eyes was a sincerity I hadn't seen in a very long time. Esperanza, he stopped and turned toward me. I know I've hurt you. I know I betrayed you when I laughed with my mother. And I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I'm only asking for a chance to prove I can change. That I am changing. I stayed silent, torn. Too much hurt, too much pain. I need time, Rodrigo, I said at last. Time to understand what I really want. He nodded. I understand. And I'll wait, as long as it takes. We returned to the hospital. Rodrigo said goodbye to my father and mother, then left for our hometown, while I stayed with my parents. In the following days, I thought a lot about our conversation, about my marriage, about what I truly wanted from life. Was I happy with Rodrigo? Did I still love him? Could I forgive betrayal? The answers didn't come easily. Part of me longed to forget everything, to return to the life we had, to give Rodrigo a chance. Another part screamed of self-respect, of the things that could never be forgiven. 10 days after the surgery, my father was discharged. The doctors were pleased with his progress, speaking of a quick recovery. He was prescribed medication, a diet, and light exercise. We decided my parents would stay for a while in the capital with Mama's sister, while I returned home to sort out my own life. At the airport, saying goodbye, I hugged my father carefully, mindful of his healing chest. Take care of yourself, Papa, and listen to the doctors. Of course, he smiled. And don't forget what we talked about. Life is too short. I nodded, a lump in my throat. And Esperanza, he added quietly, so Mama wouldn't hear, whatever you decide, remember, you deserve the very best. I flew home with a heavy heart. I hadn't told Rodrigo I was coming back. I wanted to be alone, to gather my thoughts before the inevitable conversation. The taxi dropped me off at our building late in the evening. I took the elevator up, opened the door with my key, and froze on the threshold. The apartment looked different. Some paintings were gone from the walls, as was the vase Beatrice loved so much, and the armchairs in the corner of the living room. In their place were new things, simple but tasteful. Bookshelves, the kind I'd always wanted but Rodrigo had dismissed as too plain. Photographs of me, with my parents, with my friends. I walked through the rooms, surprised by the changes. In the bedroom, on the bed, lay a note. Esperanza, if you're reading this, it means you've come back. I'm staying with my parents. I didn't want to disturb you. I changed the apartment a little, removed the gifts from my mother you always said weren't your taste. I hope you like it. Call me when you're ready to talk. Rodrigo. I sat on the bed, rereading the note. Rodrigo really was trying to change. He remembered all my complaints about the tasteless but expensive things Beatrice had filled our home with. He remembered and corrected it. But was it enough? Could redecorating an apartment erase years of neglect, mockery, humiliation? I showered and went to bed, deciding to postpone all decisions until morning. But sleep wouldn't come. I tossed and turned, thinking about Rodrigo, about our marriage, about what my father had said. In the morning, I called Rodrigo. Hello, he said, and I heard the hope in his voice. You're back? Yes, last night. Thank you for the changes. The place looks different. Do you like it? Yes, I do. We fell silent. The conversation wouldn't flow, as if we were strangers. Rodrigo, I said at last, we need to talk. I know. When? This evening? Come home at 7. All right, I'll be there. All day I prepared for that conversation. I paced the apartment, rehearsing different scenarios in my head. Deep down I already knew what I had decided, but admitting it to myself was frightening. At exactly 7, the doorbell rang. Rodrigo stood on the threshold with a bouquet of my favorite lilies. Hi, he said, holding out the flowers. May I come in? Of course, I took the bouquet. It's your home. Our home, he corrected, stepping into the living room. We sat in armchairs opposite each other. Rodrigo looked tense, but determined. How's your father? He asked. He's doing well, recovering faster than the doctors expected. I'm glad to hear that. Give him my regards. I nodded. Silence again. Finally, I gathered the courage. Rodrigo, I've thought a lot about us, about our marriage, about what happened on my birthday, and afterward. He leaned forward, listening intently. I've come to the conclusion that we can't go on as before. Too much has changed. I understand, he nodded. I think so too. We should start over. Start over? Yes. Without my parents' influence, without their money, without their expectations. Just you and me, like in the beginning. I shook my head. Rodrigo, you don't understand. It's not just about your parents. It's about us. About what we've become. We can change, Esperanza. I'm already changing. Changing? In 2 weeks? After 8 years of marriage where you let your mother humiliate me and my family? He lowered his head. I know I deserve your anger, but I'm only asking one thing. Give me a chance to prove I can be different. I looked at him, the man I had once loved more than life itself. The man I had trusted, with whom I'd dreamed of growing old. and I realized I no longer felt anything but tired pity. I'm sorry, Rodrigo, but I can't. I don't love you anymore, and I'm not sure I ever could again, after everything that's happened. He went pale. You want a divorce? Yes, I want a divorce. Rodrigo leaned back in his chair as if struck. Esperanza, please, think again. Don't make a rash decision. This isn't rash. I've been thinking about it these past days, and I realized I deserve more. I deserve someone who will respect me and my family, who won't laugh when his mother calls me a fool from a poor family. He flinched as if slapped. I know I behaved terribly, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But can one mistake erase 8 years together? It wasn't one mistake, Rodrigo. It was years of neglect. Years of putting your mother's wishes above mine. Years of lying about your work, your successes, your independence. You know? His face was stricken. Yes, I know. I know you've been living on your father's money, not earning it yourself. I know your projects were nothing but empty shells. I know this apartment wasn't a gift from your parents, but an investment I'm obligated to repay if we divorce. Rodrigo stared at the floor in silence. Who told you? No one. I found out myself. I happened to see the documents on your computer. When? Half a year ago. He lifted his head, eyes full of astonishment. And you stayed silent all this time? Yes, silent. Watching. Trying to understand whether you loved me at all, or if I was just a convenient accessory to the Herrera name. I loved you, Esperanza. I swear I did. Maybe, but not the way I deserve. Silence fell again. Rodrigo looked broken, lost. But I couldn't allow myself pity. Not now, when I had finally decided to change my life. What now? He asked quietly. I'll file for divorce. I hope you won't make it harder than it has to be. And the apartment? I know about the papers you signed. About how you'll have to repay the full value if we divorce. I'm ready for that. Rodrigo looked up at me in shock. But where would you get that kind of money? I don't have it, but I can sell the apartment and pay your parents their share. And where will you go? I don't know. I'll rent a place until I figure it out. Suddenly Rodrigo stood and began pacing the room. No, he said firmly. I won't allow that. What do you mean? I won't take any money from you for this apartment. In fact, I'll sign it over to you completely. I stared at him in disbelief. Why? Because it's the right thing to do. Because I want to do at least one thing right. And your parents? Will they agree? It's not their business. The apartment is already in your name, and I won't use the power of attorney to change that. I didn't know what to say. This gesture seemed so unlike the Rodrigo I had known. Thank you, I finally said. It's noble of you. He gave a bitter smile. Don't thank me. It's the least I can do after everything. Rodrigo walked to the window, staring out at the street. You know, he said without turning around, I always thought happiness was money, status, power. That's what my parents taught me. But it turns out happiness is when you're with someone who loves you for who you are, not for your bank account or your last name. I stayed silent, surprised by his words. I realized it too late, he continued, when I'd already lost you. Rodrigo. No, don't comfort me, he turned toward me. I deserve this, and I respect your decision. Tomorrow I'll send my lawyer with the documents to transfer the apartment fully into your name. For now I think I should go. He headed toward the door. I didn't stop him. Inside me was a strange mix of relief and sadness, as though I had just said goodbye to a part of myself that had long been sick and finally died. Goodbye, Esperanza, Rodrigo said, turning at the threshold. Be happy. The door closed, and I was alone in the apartment that was now mine alone. A strange sense of freedom swept over me, as if I had thrown off a heavy weight I'd carried for years. I went to the window and saw Rodrigo get into his car. He didn't look back, didn't wave goodbye. He just drove away, out of my home, out of my life. The next day, as promised, Rodrigo sent a lawyer with the documents. The apartment now fully belonged to me, free of any obligations to the Herrera family. I expected a furious call from Beatriz, accusations, threats. But the phone stayed silent. Later I learned from mutual acquaintances that after the incident at my birthday, Eduardo had had a serious talk with his wife. For the first time in their marriage, he put her in her place, forbidding her from interfering in their son's life and relationships. The divorce went quickly and smoothly. Rodrigo didn't contest any of my terms, didn't make counterdemands. It seemed he truly wanted to atone, doing everything possible to make the process easier for me. My parents returned from the capital a month later. Father looked much better, though he was still weak after the surgery. They stayed in my apartment. There was plenty of space. How are you, daughter? Father asked when we were alone. I'm fine, Papa. Truly fine. You don't regret the divorce? I thought for a moment. No, I don't. It was the right decision. And Rodrigo? He changed, became a different person. But too late for us. Father nodded, asking no further questions. He had always respected my choices, even if he didn't fully agree with them. Life slowly settled into a new rhythm. I returned to journalism, found work at a small publication where my experience and enthusiasm were valued. My parents decided to move to our city. After the factory closed, nothing tied them to their old home, and they wanted to be close to me. We found them a small but cozy apartment near mine. We often gathered together, had dinners, talked. For the first time in years, I felt like I had found my true self again, free from the expectations of the Herrera family. I hadn't seen Rodrigo since the divorce. Sometimes I heard about him from acquaintances. They said he had gone abroad, enrolled in business school, and was trying to start his own venture, independent of his father's company. Eduardo would sometimes call, asking about my father's health, offering help. Strangely, after everything that had happened, we developed almost friendly relations. He seemed to see me not as his former daughter-in-law, but as a person worthy of respect. One day, nearly a year after the divorce, I ran into him in a cafe. He was sitting alone, going through documents, and looked genuinely pleased to see me. Esperanza, he stood to greet me. I'm glad to see you. Sit down. I sat at his table, feeling a strange awkwardness. After all, he was my ex-husband's father. How are you? He asked, putting the papers aside. Good, thank you. And you? Fine. Working, as always. We chatted about the weather, city news, my father's health. Then Eduardo suddenly said, You know, Esperanza, I need to thank you. Me? For what? For opening my eyes, to my family, to my wife, to my son. I looked at him in confusion. What happened at your birthday, he continued, made me think about what I had built, about what kind of people my loved ones had become. And I didn't like what I saw. I stayed silent, not knowing how to respond. Beatriz has always been a difficult person, Eduardo spoke slowly, choosing his words carefully. Ambitious, demanding. But once, she was also kind and caring. Money and status changed her. And I didn't notice, because I was too busy with business. And Rodrigo? Rodrigo, he sighed. He's my son, and I love him. But I can't deny I raised him wrong. I gave him everything material, but nothing spiritual. I taught him to make money, but I didn't teach him how to be a man. Eduardo took a sip of coffee, staring somewhere past my shoulder. You know what struck me most that evening? Not Beatriz's toast. I'd long since grown used to her tactlessness. And not Rodrigo's reaction. I knew how dependent he was on his mother. What struck me was your father's speech. My father's speech? Yes. His dignity, his composure, his love for you. I suddenly realized that with all the money in the world, I hadn't been able to give my son what your father gave you, having almost nothing. I was surprised at his candor. Eduardo had never spoken to me so personally before. And what about Rodrigo now? I asked, feeling I should. He's in London, studying, working, trying to find himself. I'm glad for him. He's changed a lot, Esperanza. What happened had a profound impact on him. I nodded. I hope for the better. So do I. Eduardo finished his coffee and checked his watch. I have to go to a meeting, he said, standing up. It was nice talking with you. Me too, I said, surprised to realize I meant it sincerely. He was about to leave, but then turned back. Esperanza, I have a request. What kind of request? If Rodrigo ever wants to come back to you, give him a chance. Not for his sake or mine, for yours. I see that he truly loves you, and in our family, that kind of love is rare. I didn't know what to say. The idea of going back to Rodrigo seemed absurd, impossible. I can't promise you anything, Eduardo. Of course, he nodded. Just think about it. He left, leaving me unsettled. I hadn't planned on returning to the past. I had begun a new life, a new career. But Eduardo's words made me wonder, can people really change? And if they can, do they deserve a second chance? Time passed. I immersed myself in work, wrote more, earned a promotion. My parents settled into their new apartment. My father fully recovered after surgery. Life smoothed out, became calm and predictable. And then, a year and a half after the divorce, the doorbell rang. I opened it and froze. Rodrigo was on the threshold, but not the Rodrigo I had known. This one was different, thinner, with a bit of stubble, dressed simply, without his old polished gloss. Hi, he said uncertainly. Can I come in? Silently, I stepped aside to let him in. He walked into the living room, stopping in the middle of the room, looking around. Everything's changed here, he noted. Yes, I renovated. The apartment did look different. Light walls, minimalist furniture, lots of books, photographs on the walls. Nothing of the old luxury, nothing of the Herrera style. It's beautiful, Rodrigo said. Very you. We sat across from each other, just like that last evening before the divorce. But now everything was different. We were different people, with different experiences, different perspectives on life. How are you? Rodrigo asked. I'm good. Working at the magazine, just got promoted. My parents moved here, they live nearby. I'm glad for you. Really glad. And you? Your father said you were in London. I was. Studied at business school, worked at a startup. Came back a week ago. For good? I don't know, he shrugged. Haven't decided yet. We fell silent again. Between us hung an invisible wall, not of hostility, but of distance. Too much had been left unsaid, unforgiven. Why did you come, Rodrigo? I asked directly. He drew a deep breath. I wanted to see you, to know how you're doing, and to tell you something important. I'm listening. Rodrigo lifted his eyes to me, filled with determination. A year and a half ago, when we divorced, I thought it was the end of the world. I lost you, my relationship with my parents collapsed, especially with my mother. I felt like a complete failure. That's why I left. I wanted a fresh start. He paused, searching for words. And did it work? I asked, trying to sound calm, though my heart was pounding. Yes, he nodded. In some ways, it did. I studied, worked, lived on my own, without my father's money. For the first time, I earned by my own labor. It was sobering. I smiled faintly. I can imagine. But the most important thing I realized during this time was what an idiot I had been. How weak, spineless, childish. I let my mother control my life, dictate how I should live, who I should be with. And I lost the most valuable thing I ever had, you. I said nothing, unsure how to respond. There was a sincerity in his words I hadn't heard in years. Esperanza, he leaned forward, I'm not asking you to come back to me. I know you have your own life, and you probably don't want to return to the past. I just wanted to thank you. Thank me? For what? For making me better. Because of you, and your father, I finally understood what it means to be a real man. To be a person, not a puppet. He stood and walked to the window, gazing at the evening city. You know, he went on, not turning around, when your father took the microphone from my mother, at first I was terrified of a scandal. Then I heard his words, calm, dignified, without accusations or insults. He defended you, defended your family, but did it with such dignity. I suddenly saw what a real man should be. And I realized how far I was from that ideal. I felt tears sting my eyes. The image of my father, pale but resolute, walking to the center of the hall to defend my honor, was forever engraved in my memory. That's who he is, I said softly. He's always been like that. Rodrigo turned back to me. I want to apologize to him in person. Do you think he would agree to meet me? I thought for a moment. My father had never spoken badly of Rodrigo, even after everything. I think so. He's not one to hold grudges. Thank you. Rodrigo looked genuinely grateful. We fell silent again. I looked at this new Rodrigo, more mature, more authentic, and thought of what Eduardo had said. Can people really change, and if so, do they deserve a second chance? Esperanza, Rodrigo broke the silence. I'm leaving in a week. Going back to London. I have work there, a project I started. I see. But before I go, I'd like to ask you for something. I looked at him warily. What? Not what you're thinking, he gave a faint smile. I'm not asking you to come back to me. I'd just like to have dinner with you. Once. Not as friends, not even as exes, but as two people who were once close and want to say goodbye properly. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to agree Rodrigo truly had changed, and I was curious to see who he had become. Another part of me was afraid of reopening old wounds. I don't know, Rodrigo, I said honestly. I understand, he nodded. You don't have to answer now. Here's my card with my number. If you decide you're ready for that dinner, call me. If not, I'll understand. He handed me a small white card. I noticed it bore no company logo, no trace of his father's empire, only his name and contact information. I should go, Rodrigo said, moving toward the door. Thank you for listening. On the threshold, he turned. And, Esperanza, I'm glad you're doing well. You deserve happiness. When the door closed behind him, I stood for a long time in the hallway, staring at the card in my hand. Then I slowly walked into the living room and sat down, trying to sort through my feelings. What did I feel for Rodrigo now? Not love, that had long since cooled. But not hatred either. Not even anger. More a mixture of curiosity and caution. He had changed, that much was clear. But was it enough to give him a second chance, even just at friendship? I didn't know. I placed the card on the coffee table and decided to think about it later. The next day I told my parents about Rodrigo's visit. We were having dinner at their place. My mother had baked her signature cabbage pie, and my father opened a bottle of wine. Their small apartment was always cozy, filled with the smell of home cooking and fresh flowers my mother loved to keep in vases. "So, what have you decided?" my father asked when I finished. "I don't know," I shook my head. "Part of me wants to say yes, just out of curiosity. Another part says it's better to leave everything as it is." "And what does your heart say?" my mother asked quietly. I thought for a moment. "It's silent. I don't love him anymore, if that's what you mean." "You don't have to love someone to give them a chance to make amends," my father said. "Sometimes it's not for them, but for you." "What do you mean?" "Forgiveness frees not only the one forgiven, but also the one who forgives. Maybe this dinner will help you finally let go of the past." I looked at my father in surprise. After everything, he still remained wise and generous. "Would you meet him, if you were me?" I asked. "Yes," my father nodded. "If he's truly changed, I'd be glad to see it with my own eyes." "So would I," added my mother. "There's good in everyone, even if it's buried deep." I smiled. My parents had always known how to see the best in people without losing their sense of reality. "All right," I said. "I'll think about it." I thought for 2 more days, remembering my marriage to Rodrigo, the good moments and the bad, his words, his face during our last meeting. At last I decided. That evening I called him. "Hello, Rodrigo. It's Esperanza." "Esperanza," his voice sounded surprised, but happy. "I'm so glad you called." "I'll have dinner with you," I said directly, "but only as friends. Nothing more." "Of course," he agreed quickly. "Just as friends." "Thank you, Esperanza." We arranged to meet at a small restaurant downtown. Not El Palacio, for both of us that place carried too many painful memories. On the appointed day I spent a long time deciding what to wear. I wanted to look nice, but not like I was trying too hard. I finally chose a simple black dress and a string of pearls, my parents' gift for my 30th birthday. Rodrigo was already waiting when I arrived. He stood as I entered, his face lighting up with a smile. "You look beautiful," he said as I reached the table. "Thank you. You too." It was true. London had clearly done him good. He looked fit, tanned, with a new spark in his eyes that hadn't been there before. Dinner began a little stiffly. We didn't know what to talk about, both afraid of touching on painful topics. But gradually, with each glass of wine, the atmosphere loosened. Rodrigo told me about his life in London, about working at a startup that developed apps for charities. For the first time since I'd known him, I saw genuine passion in his eyes. "It doesn't bring in much money," he said, "but I feel like I'm doing something worthwhile, actually helping people." I told him about my work at the magazine, about the new series of articles on social issues in the city that I had been assigned. "I've read your articles," Rodrigo said unexpectedly. "I found them online. They're powerful." "Really?" I was surprised. He had never cared about my work before. "Yes, especially the one about the children's hospice. I even donated money after reading it." We talked about books we had read, films we had watched, places we had visited. And gradually I realized that I was genuinely interested in this new Rodrigo. He had become deeper, more sincere, more open. When dessert arrived, I finally gathered the courage to ask the question that had been on my mind all evening. "Rodrigo, how are things with your parents now? You said they fell apart after our divorce." He set down his fork and sighed. "With my father, it's better. He even invested in my startup, but on my terms, as an equal partner, not as a benefactor." "And with your mother?" "Still complicated. She can't forgive me for not fighting for our marriage, for letting you go, and for openly blaming her for our breakup." "You did that?" I couldn't hide my surprise. "Yes," he nodded. "I told her exactly what I thought of her behavior. How she treated you, your parents. How she manipulated me all those years." "And how did she react?" "At first, she was furious. Then she tried to play the victim. And when she realized it didn't work, she just stopped speaking to me. She still doesn't, except when absolutely necessary." "I'm sorry," I said, and I meant it. "Don't be," he gave a faint smile. "My relationship with my mother is my problem, and I'll deal with it." Sooner or later she'll have to accept that I'm no longer the mama's boy I used to be. When dinner ended, we stepped out into the warm summer night. Rodrigo offered to walk me home, and I agreed. We strolled along quiet streets, talking about little things, and it felt surprisingly easy with him, like we really were old friends, free of the heavy baggage of the past. At my door we stopped. "Thank you for tonight," Rodrigo said. "It was really nice to see you." "Me too," I smiled. Surprisingly, but it's true. He looked at me with such tenderness that for a moment my heart wavered. "Esperanza," he said softly, "I know it's over between us. I know you don't love me anymore. I'm not asking for a second chance. But maybe we could stay in touch. Not as ex-spouses, but as people who still have things to say to each other." I hesitated. A week ago I would have said no without a second thought. But now, after this evening, the idea of seeing Rodrigo occasionally didn't feel so impossible. "Maybe," I said cautiously. "Let's not make promises. You're leaving, we both have our own lives. But if you want to call or write, I'll answer." His face lit up. "Thank you. That's more than I hoped for." He didn't try to kiss me or even hug me goodbye. He just smiled and walked to his car. I watched him leave, feeling a strange mix of emotions, sadness for what might have been, if only he had changed sooner, and hope that maybe we could build some new kind of relationship, healthier and more honest. Rodrigo flew out 3 days later. Before leaving, he met with my parents. I wasn't present, but afterward my father told me that Rodrigo had sincerely apologized and thanked him for the lesson he'd learned that night. "He really has changed," my father said, "and I think, for the better." Life went on. I worked, spent time with my parents and friends, occasionally went on dates, though none grew into anything serious. Rodrigo and I exchanged emails. He wrote about his life in London, about the startup that was growing more successful by the day. I replied with news of my own, thoughts, impressions from books and films. Gradually, those letters became an important part of my life. We discussed everything: politics, philosophy, art, technology. I discovered Rodrigo in a completely new way, as an intelligent, thoughtful conversationalist, someone I could talk to about anything. And then, about a year after our dinner, I received a strange email from him. "Esperanza, I have a proposal, but I'm afraid you'll think it's crazy. May I call you?" I replied yes, of course. He called that same evening. "Hi," he said, and I could hear the nervousness in his voice. "How are you?" "I'm fine. And you? What's this mysterious proposal?" He took a deep breath. "Our startup just secured major funding. We're expanding, opening offices in several countries. I'm leading the Eastern European branch." "Congratulations. That's wonderful." "Thanks. And I need a strong journalist. Someone who can handle PR, who can tell our story, who can write powerful, moving pieces about social issues. Someone exactly like you." I suddenly understood where this was going. "Rodrigo, are you offering me a job?" "Yes," he sounded almost apologetic. "I know it might seem strange, given our history, but I really believe you're perfect for it, and it would mean a lot to work with you again." I was silent, weighing his words. To work with Rodrigo, after everything? But at the same time, the project sounded exciting, and over the past year, our exchanges had become almost friendly. "I need to think about it," I said at last. "It's a serious decision." "Of course," he agreed quickly. "I'll send you all the details about the project, the salary, the conditions. And you decide. No pressure." After we hung up, I sat in my chair, staring out the window. Rodrigo's offer had caught me off guard, but the more I thought about it, the more appealing it seemed. I'd been feeling for a while that I had outgrown my current job, that I wanted something bigger, more meaningful. The next day I discussed it with my parents. As always, they supported me. "Do what feels right," my father said. "You're old enough to make your own decisions. And don't be afraid to take risks," added my mother. "Sometimes you have to step into the unknown to find something new and beautiful." A week later I called Rodrigo and told him I accepted. He was so happy that I couldn't help but smile at his enthusiasm. "You won't regret it," he promised. "This will be a wonderful project." And now, 2 years later, I am sitting in our company's office in Prague, finishing an article about a new initiative to support children with special needs. Outside the window snow is falling, and in the next room Rodrigo is holding a meeting with the development team. Our relationship has gone through yet another transformation. From ex-spouses to pen friends, from friends to colleagues, and then into something new, something neither of us has rushed to define. We work together, live in separate apartments, but spend much of our time side by side. Sometimes we go to the movies or the theater. Sometimes we simply sit in a cafe and talk for hours. There is no longer the fiery passion of the past, but there is something deeper: understanding, respect, tenderness. My parents visited us last summer. When my father saw us together, he just smiled knowingly, but said nothing. He has never tried to impose his opinion, always letting me decide for myself how to live my life. Sometimes I think back to that evening when Beatrice delivered her humiliating toast, and my father rose and walked to the microphone. That moment became a turning point in my life. It shattered the illusions I had clung to for so long and forced me to face the truth. But it also opened the way to real freedom, to the recognition of my own worth, to a new life where I no longer try to live up to someone else's expectations, but follow my own rules. I don't know what the future will bring. Perhaps Rodrigo and I will remain colleagues and friends. Perhaps our bond will grow into something more. But now I am no longer afraid of the unknown. I know I deserve the very best, as my father once told me, and I will never again settle for less. As for Beatrice, we have only seen each other once in all these years, at Eduardo's birthday. She has hardly changed, still haughty, still looking down on others. But her words no longer have the power to wound me. I have learned to value myself not for status, not for wealth, but for who I truly am. And that is perhaps the most important lesson I have taken from this whole story. Human dignity is not measured by the thickness of a wallet. It lies in one's actions, in one's words, in the ability to protect those you love without resorting to insults or humiliation. My father always understood this. Now I understand it too. And every day I thank him for that lesson in dignity, one he gave not only to me but also to the Herrera family on that night when my mother-in-law froze in place, stunned by his calm, honorable speech. She witnessed something she could never buy with all her millions: true strength of spirit, true love, true nobility. And that sight shook her to the core. For me, it marked the beginning of my journey to my real self, to the woman who knows her worth and will not let anyone diminish it, to the daughter who is proud of her father and strives to be worthy of his love, to the person who can finally say, I am happy. Happy simply because I live authentically, loving those who deserve it and not wasting myself on those who do not. And in that happiness lies the merit of my father, who that night found the strength to stand up and speak the truth. A simple truth, but one so vital, the truth about human dignity.
If you're enjoying it as well, leave a like and subscribe to the channel.